Hey y'all, welcome to the final sidebar of season 2. Ugh, my goodness. Was that heavy or what? But before we get into it, let's recap. The last sidebar covered episodes 14 through 20. It was basically the star era of Shelonda's life, and we watched her rise and fall pretty quickly. She took over Antonio's businesses, things got out of control, and Peaches got killed. So, now that we're caught up, let's get into it. I struggled a little bit when trying to come up with a question to answer for this sidebar. If you know me, you know I hate redundancy. But after reading and recording all of the episodes, I felt like I needed to do a repeat. Maybe we need to answer an assortment of questions. We'll talk about why some things happened, how some things happened, and who these people really are. So, let's go. Episode 21. The saga continues. Even though Antonio is still in prison, he fixes the situation with the Connects. And by fixing the situation, that means that he has saved their reputation and their lives. If we think it through, Peaches' death was basically telling the Connects that he wasn't responsible for what happened, but he was going to handle who was. He traded her life for their reputations. Even still, Shelonda had to pay Peaches' point A back the money to honor her contract, basically to keep their names good in the streets. And all talks of Peaches just ceased. Angel was the only one who was willing to have a conversation about it, and that's because he was basically an outsider who had no attachment to Antonio. He also had a vested interest in making sure that Shelonda was okay, financially and emotionally. He meets with her and asks if she's okay and offers to put her in touch with a therapist. She declines, based on the stigma surrounding mental health. Present day, she's willing to admit that she could have benefited from speaking with someone. Per his request, Shelonda tells Angel that Antonio wants to meet with him, to which he responds, "I'll see him." Everything keeps moving, and Antonio is set to come home 3 months after everything happens with Peaches. Shelonda goes to pick him up from the prison and found that somebody else has already picked him up. Sidebar. I think Shelonda's reaction says a lot about who she is as a person. The fact that Antonio left with somebody else feels like a rejection to Shelonda, and that's hard for her to take. She admits that she would have been fine if she didn't want him. But going down her list of dealings with other men, you realize that that's indicative of her behavior. She lists off each situation: Brandon, Ron, and Ken. Sure enough, their rejection that made the situation worse and made her want them even more. This is obviously reflective because she says that she wished she'd had a better understanding of herself. She wished that she'd realized that she was enough without having to be wanted by somebody who didn't really have the best of intentions. That would have made life so much easier. Maybe that would have changed everything. I think that's important because you realize to that point, all of the decisions that Shelonda made regarding men were rooted in her desire to be loved. And once she faced rejection, it always affected her very deeply. If she had understood that rejection was a trigger for her, maybe she could have worked it out differently in her mind. Like instead of wanting the man more to prove that she was worthy, maybe she could have just understood that they didn't mean her well and just moved forward. That would have saved her a lot of heartache. But back to the story. Shelonda gets home and finds that Antonio is waiting for her on her couch. Making sure to express her bother, she says, "Look what the cat drug in." Anywho, Antonio acts like nothing happened at all and basically was just like, "Hey, you just gotta know I ain't on your time." Which was a direct result of Shelonda feeling like she was in charge of everything. He had to make sure that she understood that he was going to do what he wanted and she was going to follow. In the short version, he wants them to start over. He wants her to bow out, allowing him to take over the businesses, and he'll take care of her, just like the old days. Oh yeah, and she has to end her situation with Diablo, of course. Shelonda resents the idea that they can just start over after everything that happened, but she's tired. More than anything, she's scared, so she agrees to everything. She sets up a meeting between Antonio and Angel, just like Antonio told her she'd do. And true to his word, he did not allow her to attend. When it's all said and done, Angel walked out and shook both of their hands, signaling the end of one relationship and the beginning of another. In thinking of that ending, Shelonda is forced to arrive at a profound conclusion. She realizes that Peaches' death should have been enough to make her leave Antonio, yet she didn't because she did not want to be lonely. She signs everything back over to Antonio and goes back to being his girlfriend and his bookkeeper. She returns to the top of the hierarchy that doesn't really exist anymore. And because there are so many ill feelings between the two of them, their relationship starts to suffer. They're more like business partners than people in a relationship. Y'all know how that is. Once you start feeling some kind of way about somebody, it just ain't the same, especially sexually. And by Shelonda's account, Antonio's strength was in his sensuality and not in his penis size. Without the benefit of him taking the time to sufficiently please her, it sucked pretty bad. She reflected back to the conversations that she'd had with Cream in the past, and suddenly she understood it. Either way, things continued that way for like a year. Episode 22, All Good Things. Here's where we start to get a really good interpretation of the time. At the beginning of this episode, Shelonda mentions that it's 2005. She's 25 and Antonio is 37. If you remember, Shelonda met Antonio immediately after Ken went to jail. She was fresh out of high school. She was 18. So by that point, they had been in this relationship for 7 years. That's a lot of stuff to happen in 7 years. 3 of the years he was locked up, and they had spent a year afterwards just basically existing together. But out of the blue, Antonio tells her that they need a break from the businesses and asks her to go to Hawaii. Shelonda agrees and feels like it's the perfect place because that's where they took their first major vacation together. It was very strategic that this chapter was titled All Good Things because it's basically what happened. Over the course of that day, Shelonda, and we as an audience, was able to re-experience some of her good times with Antonio. It was strategic because they were the foundational moments that we saw as we watched Shelonda fall in love with Antonio. She got her hair braided and got a manicure and pedicure. My mind flashed back to the first time that happened when he sat with her all day to get those things done. He took her to those places because they were the best and she deserved the best. He spoon-fed her because her nails were wet. And while she did those things alone on that day, you connect them to the first time that they happened and you remember why she fell in love with him. Shelonda and Antonio ate lunch together. They went to the same seafood restaurant that they went to on their first date. On their first date, it was a cool night. Shelonda was nervous because it was her very first date. Keep in mind she was 18. She was impressed by how much money he spent. She didn't know how to eat lobster. He took her to the strip club afterwards. 7 years later, she had been in charge of that same strip club and touched more money than she knew what to do with. Afterwards, they went to his office. I'm not sure which office because the strip club had gotten burned down. I don't know. He did have other businesses though. Maybe they had offices. Anyway, he locked the door and it was reminiscent of the old days, back when they used to have good sex. And that's what happened. He undressed her, causing us all to flash back to when he did that for the very first time, and they had amazing sex. Afterwards, he drove her to her car, where they parted company. Shelonda mentions that there was nothing special about their goodbye. It was just comfortable. That was intentional too. Things have been so shaky between them. The idea of comfort was reminiscent of when things were at their best. Shelonda goes home to pack, and even though she arrives late, Antonio happily welcomes her back. After dropping off her bag in the bedroom, he asks her to join him on the couch. Shelonda straddles Antonio, and they enjoy a passionate exchange. They kiss. He runs his finger through her braids, and in 1 second, everything comes back. After a whole year of stagnancy within that relationship, Shelonda suddenly starts feeling the attraction, the love, the butterflies, everything. It just shows right back up. And if that wasn't enough, that man took out his phone and started playing Where Do Broken Hearts Go. He asked her to dance, and he sang the words, The part of the song that I chose to use was strategic as well. Where do broken hearts go? Can they find their way home? Back to the open arms of a love that's waiting there. And if somebody loves you, won't they always love you? I look in your eyes and I know that you still care for me. Again, this is just for entertainment. I claim no rights. Gotta say that. But the reason why that specific part was chosen is because of the wording. And Shelonda picks up on it. Over the course of that week, she noticed a difference in Antonio. And when he played that song and sung it to her, she realized that it had all been his attempt to get them back to where they used to be. It was his attempt to find his way back home. She realized that the fact that they really loved each other meant that they could find their way back. They stand there for a while, just holding each other. Neither of them wanting to let go. I think that's the part that's so heartbreaking. But anyway, the doorbell rings, and it's the Chinese food. Of course, he has ordered her favorite, General Tso chicken with extra sauce, lo mein, no onions, and extra broccoli. The mind flashes back to when he pops up on her for the first time, back when she had like this mega crush on him. It's 1998. But she was confused about what he really wanted from her. They ate and had great conversation, just like they used to. He looks at the clock, and he sees that it's after 11 o'clock, and he says that they need to go to bed. Shelonda jokingly asks if they're going to bed or if they're going to sleep, knowing that she has planned to have sex with him. He tells her that he loves her and that he's never going to love anybody else the way he loves her. Antonio picks Shelonda up and walks her to the bedroom, something that she has always loved. And just then, the doorbell rings. They're not expecting anyone, so Antonio tells Shelonda to stay in the bedroom and he'll get rid of whoever it is. Shelonda gets impatient after about 10 minutes, so she covers up her sexy lingerie, and for the first time, she does not do what she was told. She walks out and finds Sharon in the living room. Episode 23, The End. Shelonda walks into the living room and locks eyes with Sharon. Through her tears, Sharon laughs in disbelief. Shelonda apologizes and says that they never meant for it to happen. And in Shelonda's mind, that's true. She didn't initially plan to take things that far with Antonio. If you remember, she said that she loved Sharon too much to try to take him. She was just kind of taking the ride. But Sharon understands that only half of that is true. While Shelonda may not have planned it, Antonio absolutely had a plan in place. Sharon goes on to tell Shelonda that the plan was always for Antonio to take her in and to either get her to strip or to be a prostitute. But as the time passed, she realized that Antonio was falling for Shelonda. She knew this because she recognized the signs. She had done the exact same thing to Cream. She asked him to choose, and he said no. Meanwhile, he was still asking them both to be faithful to him. Man, Antonio was a piece of work. You hear me? But anyway, you find out that she's so mad that she called his probation officer and told her that he'd have a dirty urine. She thought he'd get locked up and leave her the businesses, but he had signed them over to Shelonda, who inadvertently got her salon burned down. To clarify, I know we didn't really say, but Sharon's salon and Antonio's club got burned down because Peaches failed to honor her contract with the Point A. Remember, they thought it was Antonio's operation, so they took out the things that were connected to him. Sharon understood that. She knew that that wouldn't have happened if Antonio had left the businesses to her. Meanwhile, Antonio forgave Shelonda, and she was still running the businesses. I was supposed to say that Sharon was left doing hair out of her basement, but I accidentally said that she was doing hair out of her salon, which made no sense since it got burned down. But anyway, Sharon and Antonio agreed to work on their relationship, and she picked him up from the prison, which is why he wasn't there when Shelonda showed up. That's also why he and Shelonda's relationship went stale. If you notice, Antonio could only really have one. I mean, he always had a bunch of women, but he was only really good to one. At that point, it was obviously Sharon. But for some reason, that becomes obvious after the fact, something changed that week. And Sharon noticed it. He was less attentive and somewhat cold. Because she knew Antonio, she knew there was someone else. She had spent the night with Antonio. She got up, made him breakfast, and they told each other that they loved each other. 2 hours later, he called her and told her that he was letting her go, like she was an employee. Of course, she was hurt and upset. So she came over to get some closure and realized that Shelonda was the reason why. Now, considering the fact that she was trying to either pimp Shelonda out or put her on the pole, I don't know if her anger was completely justified. However, she does have a point because sometimes it's not about what the truth is. It's about what you know. Shelonda didn't know that Sharon had tried to set her up. She thought that she was racing her friend for a man, her friend that took her in, provided a job for her, provided transportation for her, and helped boost her self-esteem. Apparently, that's the only angle that Sharon saw as well. And in the end, she felt that Antonio had taken so much out of her that she was going to make him watch Shelonda die. Only he got in the way, and Sharon accidentally killed Tim. Unable to deal with that, Sharon turned the gun on herself. But to make sure that Shelonda suffered the guilt forever, she said, "You did this." Sidebar. So y'all don't know me in real life, so y'all probably won't understand this. But I have a real life fascination with some of my characters. Well, most of them. There's this character in one of my books named Twan that I wanted to marry one time. Similarly, I loved Antonio. I guess more so, I liked Antonio and Shelonda together. Something really strange happened in the recording of these last episodes. It also happened during the creating of these books. I experienced an extreme heaviness when it was time to kill Antonio. These books were written in 2020. It's 4 years later, and I started feeling so heavy when I was recording the All Good Things episode, just because I knew what was coming next. I so did not want this to happen. I've discussed this with a few people, and they basically said, if you had such an emotional reaction to it, why did you kill him? The answer is simple. He had to die. Shelonda loved that man. She loved that man so much. She never would have left him. In order for her to go on to another relationship, he couldn't have ever existed in this life. It was so heart-wrenching though. Like, I felt like I lost Antonio. Ugh. And another little side note. Something profound happens in the book version. Earlier, the O in Antonio's name turned into an exclamation type heart once Shelonda fell in love with him. After he died, the O was replaced by a broken black heart. I placed a picture of it in the episode description for reference. Again, it's heartbreaking. Episode 24, Smile. Shelonda handles Antonio and Sharon's funeral arrangements, and she breaks down why she felt obliged. Shelonda met Sharon when she was 12. At that point, she was 25. For a huge portion of her life, Sharon was there to guide and motivate her. She helped to build her self-esteem. They were connected in some ways that Shelonda didn't mention in that moment. Remember that Ron is Sharon's uncle. They had both been molested and impregnated by him. Sharon had been really good to her at certain points. Shelonda believed that she knows why she turned on her. Antonio. However, she understands it. If I had to explain it, Shelonda and Antonio probably had some sort of soul tie. Well, she literally said that her soul was tied to his. He was the first man to treat her in a way that never made her feel afraid. Well, other than when he killed Peaches. And when it boiled down to it, he had something so special that it made Sharon betray her. But it also made her betray Sharon. It made Sharon betray Cream. And it made Cream betray Peaches. All that. And he had a little penis. Good. Anyway, a month later, She's contacted by Antonio's lawyer. She gets there and immediately reflects on having been there with Antonio during the exchange of the businesses. Once inside, the lawyer gives her a handwritten letter from Antonio. It said, "My sweet little girl, I want you to know that I love you more than life itself. I won't ever love anyone the way that I love you. If you're reading this, I can no longer fulfill my promise to take care of you forever. I won't burden you with my business, as we know how that ended the last time. I did, however, leave a little something for you. I know that you can do this thing without me. Go to school. Do what you should have done, what I should have pushed you to do from the beginning. I'm taking the star out of my pocket. Shine, little girl. Love always, your Anemone." And I think y'all all get the Shine, little girl reference now. Anywho, me and Shelonda were both all to pieces. Yep, both of us. Making matters worse, she comes to an awful realization. So much of what happened was the result of her getting too far ahead of herself, which is why the title of this book is Too Far Ahead, by the way. She says, "I had to go on and I had to face the truth. Every single thing that happened was my fault. It was all on me. If I had turned Antonio away the first time, If I had turned Antonio away the first time, he and I wouldn't ever have been. If I hadn't braced Sharon for Antonio, I wouldn't ever have taken her place. If I hadn't held my relationship with Antonio so closely, I would have taken Cassidy for Mom. If I hadn't ever started my own drug operation, Peaches wouldn't ever have stolen from me. If I hadn't started my own operation, neither Sharon's salon nor Antonio's club would have been burned to the ground, making it harder for Sharon and Cream to make a living. If I hadn't verbally annihilated Antonio at the prison, I wouldn't have felt responsible for Peaches' death. If I hadn't stayed with Antonio, it would have been easier for him to make things work with Sharon. If he had made things work with Sharon, they would both be alive. It was my fault. It was all my fault. Inevitably, I had to arrive at a conclusion. In getting so far ahead of myself, I, and everyone that I held dear, had gotten left behind. I felt myself, Antonio, Sharon, Cream, Peaches, and Cassidy. How could anyone live with that guilt? Apparently, I wrote this poorly because I don't even know where I am at this point. But anyway, in the short version, Antonio left her $1.5 million and his insurance policy. She left and went to a coffee shop where a man paid for her coffee and cinnamon bun. I messed that part up too, but anyway. They talked, and she realized that he made her smile for the first time since Sharon killed Antonio. And that man is about to become her new kin. So that's it for this season. I hope y'all enjoyed. We have one more season coming up, and the ride is just as wild. Get ready, y'all. It's about to get good. Join me on the next season. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Chinney Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Thank you for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.